In March 1986, General Mamman Vatsa, the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory (FCT), was executed by the military government of General Ibrahim Babangida. The execution followed allegations of a coup plot against the regime. The verdict shocked many Nigerians because Vatsa was not only a senior military officer but also a long-time associate of the head of state. In fact, Babangida was Vatsa's best man at his wedding. So, why was Vatsa accused? What evidence was presented against him? Why did Babangida approve the death sentence despite their personal relationship? This episode will focus on the facts surrounding the 1986 alleged coup and its consequences within the armed forces. Then, by the end of this episode, you would have learnt why Mamman Vatsa was executed, the official reasons given by the Babangida regime, and how the aftermath affected Nigeria's military and political history. In the early hours of December 17, 1995, more than 100 officers of the Army, Navy, and Air Force were arrested across Nigeria. They were accused of plotting to overthrow the 4-month-old government of Major General Ibrahim Babangida, who had taken power on August 27, 1995, after removing Major General Muhammadu Buhari in a palace coup. After the arrest, a special investigation panel chaired by Brigadier Sani Sami reviewed selected cases. A special military tribunal began formal hearings on January 27, 1986 at the Brigade of Guards headquarters in Victoria Island, Lagos. The tribunal was convened by Major General Domkat Bali under the Treason and Other Offences Special Military Tribunal Decree No. 1 of 1986. The tribunal was presided over by Major General Charles B. Indiomu and included senior military officers and the Commissioner of Police. A judge advocate and a prosecution team were appointed. Proceedings were conducted under military supervision. Some officers were discharged after no case submissions. Others were tried separately on different charges. Among those accused was Major General Mamman Vatsa, a senior officer and former Minister of the Federal Capital Territory. Other accused officers included Lieutenant Colonels, Majors, Captains, and Air Force Commanders. They were charged with involvement in an alleged coup conspiracy. It was alleged that the plot was financed by Vatsa through money given to Lieutenant Colonel Musa Bitiyong under the cover of a family loan. The amount mentioned was 10,000 naira. At the time, it was estimated that organizing a coup could require between 50,000 and 100,000 naira. The prosecution claimed that part of the money was shared for travel and related expenses. Vatsa denied that the money was intended to fund the coup. He maintained that it was for farming purposes. It was also stated that he did not meet with other accused officers to plan any overthrow of the government. Apart from Bitiyong, the other officers did not describe themselves as working directly for him. Reports later claimed that Bitiyong implicated Vatsa during interrogation. Other allegations suggested that Vatsa had disagreements with Babangida before the coup attempt. There were also claims that he had political ambitions. These issues were raised during investigations and trial proceedings. Before 1985, Vatsa had publicly opposed previous coup attempts, including the 1976 Dimka coup. He later served as secretary of the panel that tried those involved in that coup. Despite this record, he was convicted by the tribunal. In March 1986, Mamman Vatsa and several other officers were executed after being found guilty of plotting to overthrow the government. Now, let us examine the background, trial process, and official reasons given for Vatsa's execution. After Major General Ibrahim Babangida removed the Buhari government in August 1985, Major General Mamman Vatsa returned from pilgrimage in Mecca. Soon after his return, he met with Lieutenant Colonel Musa Gideon in Lagos. During this period, discussions reportedly began among some officers about dissatisfaction with the new regime. In September 1985, Gideon invited Lieutenant Colonel Iyoshe from Kaduna to Lagos. Iyoshe was later accused but acquitted, as he was described as having acted without full knowledge of any alleged conspiracy. Gideon presented documents which he claimed showed wrongdoing involving military and defense equipment contracts under the new government. Iyoshe, who was regarded as a strict and professional officer, reacted strongly to the allegations. In October, Iyoshe discussed the matter with Lieutenant Colonel Oche of Military Intelligence. Additional claims were made about questionable activities, including the release of individuals previously detained under the Buhari regime. Some officers expressed concern about discipline within the armed forces and the pattern of repeated coups involving the same group of senior officers. There were also discussions about national economic policy. It was suggested that the proposed acceptance of an International Monetary Fund (IMF) loan could negatively affect the country. These concerns were raised in conversations among a small circle of officers. Air Force officers, including Squadron Leader Martin Luther and Wing Commander Ben Kelly, were approached. Meetings were held in late November 1985 at the Sheraton Hotel in Lagos and later at a guest house in Makurdi. Those present at various meetings included Iyoshe, Gideon, Oche, Oguiji, Ekele, Sakaba, and Bamidele. A naval officer, Commodore Oguiji, attended one meeting after being invited by a colleague. However, no operational role for the Navy was defined. Discussions reportedly focused on political criticism of the regime rather than detailed military planning. At the Makurdi meeting, the possible role of the Air Force was discussed. Officers explained the technical limitations of using aircraft such as the MiG-21 or the Sepekat Jaguar for ground operations against armored units in Lagos. It was stated that the Air Force could not play a decisive role in any such action. No concrete operational plan was agreed upon at the meetings. There was no clear allocation of troops or defined timetable. Although some officers continued informal discussions afterwards, the meetings ended without an agreed strategy for the use of force. These events later formed part of the allegations presented during the investigation and trial of the so-called Vatsa Coup plots. In late 1985, rumors of coup plotting spread widely within the Nigerian army. Officers monitored one another closely. The overthrow of the Buhari regime on August 27, 1985, and the perceived rewards given to those involved affected morale among sections of the officer corps. Some officers held separate and informal discussions. Wing Commander J. Coup, who commanded Alpha Jets at Carnage, was reportedly approached but refused to participate in any plots. He advised against Air Force involvement. However, because he did not officially report the alleged recruitment attempts, he was later charged with concealment and sentenced to imprisonment. In other conversations in Lagos, ideas were mentioned about diverting the presidential aircraft through executive fleet pilots. The suggestion was that the commander-in-chief could be detained and asked to resign. No operational plan was finalized and no formal structure was established around the idea. Lieutenant Colonel Oche was said to have met Majors Akwashiki and Onyeke after a squash game to discuss national issues, including economic policy and the proposed IMF loan. He did not admit to planning a coup with them. Nevertheless, Akwashiki was sentenced to death, although his sentence was later reduced. Years later, he was pardoned under a subsequent administration. Oche also reportedly informed his nephew, Lieutenant Peter Odoba of the Guards Brigade, about the existence of a possible plot. Odoba passed the information to another officer linked to military intelligence. However, the lieutenant was later accused of concealment and recommended for dismissal and imprisonment. The relationships among officers in the Kaduna and Zaria axis, including Iyoshe, Bamidele, West, and Effiong, became part of the investigation. Iyoshe and Bamidele were executed. Effiong's death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. The case of Bamidele attracted attention because he had earlier reported a coup plot in 1983 but was detained at that time and later faced execution over allegations of involvement in another plot. On March 5, 1986, Major General Mamman Vatsa, Lieutenant Colonel Musa Bitiyong, Lieutenant Colonel Christian Oshe, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Iyoshe, Major Daniel Bamidele, Commodore A.A. Ogwiji, Wing Commander Ben Ekele, Wing Commander Adamu Sakaba, Squadron Leader Martin Luther, and Squadron Leader A. Haura were executed following the tribunal's verdict under the government of Major General Ibrahim Babangida. Another officer, Brigadier Malami Nasarawa, was separately accused of preparing a different coup. When evidence was not sustained, further allegations relating to loyalty and discipline were raised. He was discharged from the army, retried, and eventually acquitted. Despite the acquittal being upheld by the Armed Forces Ruling Council and later the Provisional Ruling Council, he remained in detention for months before being released on the order of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So, why were Vatsa and the others executed? Major General Mamman Vatsa, often described as a soldier, poet, and poultry farmer, was from the Nupe ethnic group in Niger State. In 1985, he was accused of masterminding a coup plot against the government of Major General Ibrahim Babangida. Both officers were from Niger State and had attended the same military training institutions. Their relationship later became a subject of public discussions after the coup allegations emerged. The officers accused alongside Vatsa came from different regions and backgrounds within the armed forces. They were tried before a special military tribunal. The proceedings were conducted within the military system, and the verdicts led to death sentences for several of the accused officers. The plot was said to have failed because information about it reached the authorities before any action was taken. The accused officers were not part of the group previously associated with earlier successful coups in Nigeria. By that time, the Babangida administration had consolidated control over key military and political structures. Despite appeals for clemency from various quarters, including public calls for mercy, the executions were carried out. Babangida later rejected claims that the executions were influenced by religion, stating that decisions were based on military law and tribunal findings. It was also argued within military circles that previous coup attempts, including the 1976 Dimka coup, had resulted in execution under similar legal frameworks. The government maintained that the sentences followed established military procedures. In later years, Babangida provided further explanations regarding the reasons behind the execution of the convicted officers. Then, why did Babangida kill Vatsa? In an interview in 2001, General Ibrahim Babangida explained why he approved the execution of Major General Mamman Vatsa and other officers in 1986. He stated that after the alleged coup was uncovered, he came to believe that Vatsa's actions were linked to a long-standing personal rivalry between them. According to him, the rivalry dated back to their earlier years as officers and to their time in military training. Babangida said that both men had been competitive throughout their careers. He claimed that whenever one achieved a milestone, the other pursued a similar path. He also stated that Lieutenant General Theophilus Danjuma had earlier drawn his attention to this pattern in their service records. Babangida presented the background as part of the reason he believed the plot was serious and personal. He said that when he first received information that Vatsa was involved in planning a coup, he decided to monitor the situation rather than act immediately. According to him, Vatsa was later arrested to prevent interference with ongoing investigations. Babangida maintained that the arrest followed intelligence findings. The former head of state further explained that he did not consider retirement or imprisonment as sufficient punishment. He stated that he believed Vatsa could still plan another coup either from retirement or from prison. He described Vatsa as determined and capable of continuing political opposition within the military structure. He also recounted that he watched a recording of the execution but turned away when Vatsa removed his wristwatch and asked that it be given to his wife. He said he could not continue watching. Babangida presented these remarks as part of his personal account of the events surrounding the execution. But could Vatsa have planned a coup? None of the accused officers commanded a major body of troops large enough to overthrow or seriously threaten the regime. Since July 1966, no military coup in Nigeria had succeeded without the backing of at least one general officer commanding. Major General Mamman Vatsa was serving as a federal minister at the time and had no troops under his direct command. He could not have used civil servants. Two principal claims formed the core of the case against him. First, it was alleged that he gave 10,000 naira to an officer named Gideon, which the prosecution argued was used to finance the coup. Second, it was claimed that he issued certificates of occupancy to some of the alleged plotters as a means of providing financial support. However, 10,000 naira was considered by many observers to be a small amount, particularly if the intention was to persuade senior officers to risk their careers and lives. It was also established that Vatsa had issued certificates of occupancy to other military officers, including at least one member of the Special Military Tribunal that later sentenced him to death. Although it was acknowledged that Vatsa gave money to Gideon, no additional direct evidence was publicly presented linking him to operational planning, and there was no proof that he attended the alleged coup meetings. Whether Vatsa planned a coup or not is now secondary, as he was found guilty and executed on March 5, 1986. However, on October 9, 2025, 39 years after his execution, President Bola Tinubu granted Vatsa a posthumous pardon over his treason charge. The execution of Major General Mamman Vatsa and others on March 5, 1986 marks the first time in Nigeria's history that a charge of conspiracy to commit treason resulted in the death penalty. Before then, conspiracy had generally been treated as a treasonable offense rather than treason itself. In earlier political trials in independent Nigeria, long prison sentences were imposed instead. For example, Chief Obafemi Awolowo and others received lengthy prison terms in 1963, and Buka Mandara was jailed in 1982. Planning or discussing a coup had not been treated in the same way as executing one, as seen after the failed 1976 coup led by Bukasuka Dimka, where those directly involved in the violent attempts were executed. Beyond those executed or imprisoned, many officers were compulsorily retired or dismissed in the aftermath of the 1986 tribunal. Some were removed because of associations or suspicions rather than proven actions. Others were publicly named during investigations but later cleared without similar publicity. The wider consequences included institutional distrust within the armed forces and long-term losses in experienced personnel, with effects that extended beyond the military into Nigerian society as a whole. Many of the officers executed in 1986 were among the most senior and professionally trained in the armed forces. Their deaths were widely regarded as a national loss, comparable in scale to the later 1992 Nigerian Air Force C-130 crash. The executions deepened distrust between the military government and sections of the officer corps. In particular, the Air Force was significantly affected, as several of those removed or executed were from that service, contributing to a gradual weakening of its institutional strength. Training, procurement, and operational readiness suffered in the years that followed. Supplies and logistics, including basic operational materials such as aviation fuel, became tightly centralized and monitored. The Air Force did not begin a serious process of rebuilding and professional reorganization until the return to civil rule in 1999. During the intervening years, limited operational experience came largely from regional peacekeeping missions in Liberia and Sierra Leone under the Economic Community of West African States Monitoring Group framework. Within the army, suspicion increased among officers, affecting morale and internal cohesion at a time when the institution was still recovering from earlier crises. Some senior figures later commented publicly on the long-term institutional damage. Although the Babangida regime may have believed the executions would deter future coups, the assumption was tested in April 1990 when Major Gideon Orkar announced an attempted coup and cited the 1986 executions of General Mamman Vatsa and others among his grievances. You can check out the full story in our next episode.